Jacques, do you think that there are actual government agencies? I know this is sort of different from what Jeff was just talking about, which is really important, but this question does come up about whether our government agencies are actually trying to develop technology in secret, which they can use to actually try to reach these craft and communicate with them in some
And
ways.
after Jacques speaks, I do wanna speak to the communication issue and the attempt to invoke it, because that's a classic religious response as well.
Yeah.
I'll give you a short answer. I think the government, of course, there is no such thing as the government, but there are people in doing research within the government who go, easily from academia to, government jobs or government projects. I think those are the people we're talking to. They're usually, university professors and experts in linguistics and experts in perception and biologists, and to some extent people like Dr. Nolan and I are on the edge of that community, and we're definitely interested. But I don't think it's necessarily something that is classified in the sense that some of the hardware would be classified.
Mhm. Okay. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, just to add to that, I mean, so I exist in the academy, and I have lots of colleagues like Jacques speaking about, and my own my own guess is that nobody knows what this is about, including the government. We keep speak of it in the singular, and Jacques absolutely right. I don't think there is such a thing. I exist in a large institution, and I can tell you that there is no Rice University either. There are different levels, there are different hierarchies, there are different communications in it, but there's no singular source of there's no there's no committee sitting around, making bad decisions, as it were. And I'm deeply skeptical of any of the conspiracy theories for the same reason. I just don't think people are smart enough to do that, and I don't think they're sinister enough to do that. On the other hand, the history of human thought, and certainly the history of religions, is filled with control systems. It's filled with not just suggestions, but very detailed maps of why we're being deceived. And this goes back at least 2,500 years to Plato's Republic. I mean, the parable of the cave is all about why not to trust the senses and why perception is deception. So I think this level of this trust in perception, human perception, is itself deeply mistaken and called into question by the whole history of human experience too, by the way. And that's way before there even is an American government.
Right.
That's ancient Greece. That's a philosopher talking, in the original academy, which was a grove, by the way, outside of Athens. So wow, my joke is the ultimate conspiracy theory is it's called the humanities. If you wanna be suspicious of everything, just study the humanities. You will never believe anything ever again. And I say that sadly and with a smile on my face, but it's true. You learn to be suspicious of everything. And the ultimate thing we need to be suspicious of is suspicion. We need to, like, apply these methods to ourselves and to our own convictions in a way that I think many people it's we struggle to do that.
Well, you know, still speaking about the academia, there's also mathematics and logic and information theory, where you find the same thing. There are theorems that for which there cannot be a proof.
Mhm.
Okay? There are, and we know there cannot be a proof in our science, but the science from Alpha Centauri, I mean, they may be way, developed much beyond us. But that same theorem they must have thought about and they have come they must have come to the same conclusion that you could not prove it. You couldn't prove the truth or the falsity of that assertion. Okay, so those things have been found before and thought about before, as you know, since Plato. But usually there is, if you go up a level in terms of language, if you go up a level, there may be another, and of course that's what Eastern religion often talks about. Go up a level, and then there is another universe of truth. Okay, one case I often mention, and people are probably sick of hearing it, but was a case in 1954 in France where a night watcher goes to his job in the middle of the night through a forest, comes to a clearing. There's a saucer landed in the clearing, a disc, and there is a man in front of it in coveralls, not a humanoid with a helmet and so on, just a man holding something that he points at the witness, and the witness stops. He's not paralyzed or anything. He just stops, and the man asks, "What time is it?" And the witness says it's 2:30 in the morning, and the man says, "You lie. It's 5 o'clock." And then he says, "Where am I? Am I in Germany or Italy?" And of course, that's stupid because there is Switzerland in between Germany and Italy, and furthermore, he's in Alsace in France. So the night watchman says, "You're in Alsace." And the man says, to freeze, goes back behind the object. We assume that he gets into the object. We don't know that. The thing takes off, and that's only at that point that he realizes this was not a helicopter, or an American pilot who had lost his way. Okay, Germany was still occupied at that point by the French, the British, and the Americans. Well, if everybody laughed, of course, at this guy, he said, well, he was still sleeping, sleepwalking to his job. But then when you look at it at the next level, there are two questions and two answers. Both of them are absurd. One is absurd about space. The other one is absurd about time. There is no space and there is no time. Now, when I talk to Dr. Eric Davis, who is my reference in modern physics, he says, "Of course, Jacques, where have you been? We got rid of dimensions a long time ago. I mean, in the quantum foam, there is no present, future, here, now, and so on. That's not true anymore. This is what you experience as a human being. So go on, with buying watches and so on. But that's not physically fundamental. Those are derived quantities." Well, that may be what the alien was injecting in the mind of the witness. We don't know if it's the alien. He looked human. Okay? But, we know they can take all kinds of shapes and forms. So I think that's, we have to look at the absurdity. Absurdity has a meaning in logic. It's not the end of logic. It has a meaning, and the meaning is you have to go up one level. That's what people have done in mathematics in the last century, creating new levels of mathematics in which you could solve problems that could not be solved at the elementary level. And so I think there is a parallel here between what Jeff is saying about philosophy, about logic in philosophy, and then logic in mathematics and logic in science.
Yeah, I mean, Leslie, this gets into the whole question of Gnosticism too, that I know is on the table. And I mean, the notion of, for lack of a better word, expression, what we call apophatic mystical literature, or mystical literature that expresses people's experiences that deconstruct time and space, to use Jacques' language.
Mhm.
And but also deconstruct this notion of God as some kind of external being, or the soul as some kind of object. I mean, it's really radical. But people actually have these experiences to speak to Jacques again. This is not fantasy. This is a moving up to another level, but it's another level where we see our science as human, as an expression of us, not the other way around.
I could listen to both of you talk about these topics forever. It's fascinating.
How many questions like that do you have, Leslie?
No, but the one about Gnosticism, I don't know if that's maybe, was
Well,
that question now, or if you, Jeff,
yeah, well, let's take that one because it relates directly to what Jacques just said. That's the moving up. That's the moving up to another level, I think. Gnosis is Greek for direct knowledge, but it's not diaonia. It's not discursive, languaged knowledge. It's not knowledge about, it's knowledge of. It's being something. And I think this moving up to another level is when you become that which you know, and so a lot of these encounters that we're speaking about, there really is a kind of Gnostic element to them in that they're moving up to another level and they're moving outside of space and time in a way that is dramatic. Ancient Gnosticism is often associated with the kind of anti-material or anti-world kind of attitude, and so I'm not speaking about that here. I'm speaking about some kind of moving up that I think Jacques is speaking to as well.
or are you implying that if one has a kind of Gnostic experience of moving up, is that something that is permanent for the person? Or are you talking about a mystical experience that then they sort of have to reintegrate in their, I mean, how does that impact the person in the long term?
I think it's relatively confusing to human beings, and I think the whole notion of integration means we reduce it back to our worldview, and,
You have to kind of to be on this planet and function, right?
well,
Have to do something.
I'm not sure you have to, but I think most people want to. I think there is a moral or a healing impulse there. I don't know if those 2 levels are really compatible, though. I mean, Jacques mentioned Asian religions. I mean, in Buddhism, for example, there's conventional truth and there's ultimate truth, and ultimate truth is not conventional truth. They're not the same at all. Um, so I'm not sure at the end of the day if they're compatible, except they're both us. They're both knowledges of human beings, and so I think they can be integrated. These traditions, like a lot of the Buddhist traditions, have integrated them. But to what extent, I'm not sure. I think we have to be critical of our religious traditions as well as our rational or scientific traditions. We just don't know. I don't and my joke is my request for particularly my students is, "Geez, I hope you're not happy. I hope you're not integrated. I hope you're really messed up." Because that's way more interesting than being happy or whole or being integrated completely into the social system. Uh, and I think it does lead to insight, and I think it does lead to these sorts of experiences that we've been talking about.
Really interesting. Yeah.
To balance that idea, I think if you're well integrated and you're happy and your life is going on naturally, you can be replaced by AI. I mean, the question of what does it mean to be human today, is you're disturbed, you're worried about something, you're trying to create something, you're trying to break something up. And, I think that's very relevant.
So we talk a lot about AI, of course, in higher education. It's a real problem. It's a terrible problem, actually. And some people will say it's the worst. These are the worst times for the humanities. But they're also the best times, and that AI shines a bright light on what makes somebody human, what makes a human human, which is precisely not this mimicry or this happiness that we're talking. It's precisely the being messed up or the looking for the solution or the creative thing. And I think this is I know we to go to Philip K. Dick here for a moment, this is Blade Runner. The android is precisely the machine that looks human but can feel no emotion. can feel no distance or no emotional compassion. And so I think there is something really unique about a human being that is not AI, that is not a machine, that is not an android.
And when he tries when he starts feeling emotions, you have to kill him.
Yeah.
Then you're in trouble, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's where we are. That's, I mean, metaphorically, that's kind of where we're at as a culture, right? That we want to eliminate the human difference, and we want everything to be AI, and we want everything to be data. We don't want gnosis, we want data. We want more information, not insight or realization.
It's not what I want, Jeff.
I know. I'm speaking we. I'm speaking out for other people. I shouldn't do that.
No, no, no. I'm just being silly. Fascinating, fascinating stuff. I guess we'll just go on to another question, or you say more. Say more.
Well, I wanna just talk to Jean. I mean, the the reason I personally love the UFO is precisely because no one knows what it is.
Mhm.
If 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 we had a way to frame it and explain it, I would ignore it. I would like, "Okay, let's go on to something else," you know? And this is again why I love Jacques' work is it really emphasizes that not knowing, you know? And the weird and the strange and the impossible, as I call it, and that's where, again, I think the future is. And so that it speaks again to this notion of integration or happiness, but it also speaks to this question of trauma and eruption of ontological shock and kind of a future impulse that I think is at the core of what Jacques has done over the decades.
I mean, the irony of that for me, and I completely agree with you, and that's what's important about it. But the irony for me, as this reporter who's trying to convince Congress that we don't know what it is. It's a physical thing. We've got radar and we've got witnesses, and it's a national security problem. I mean, the way to move the government forward is to make them think we do know and we should know more. We got to investigate to find out exactly what they are. So it sets a different I kind of live in both worlds. I live way more in your what you're talking about in terms of my own personal life, but you see what I'm saying about that
Yes.
time?
Yeah, let me just Jacques, let me just say a word here and then turn it over, but I love the government conversation in the halls of Congress, as it were, because it raises the issue into the stratosphere. I mean, your work with the New York Times, Leslie, has been definitive there. I love all that, but I also love this push that it's weirder than you think. It's
Yeah,
not it's not only a machine, it is a machine, it does leave burn marks on trees, it does all this physical stuff, and it does all this telepathic mind-to-mind stuff, and how do we think it just blows up all of our categories,
that's
because
right.
we wanna separate those 2, and we wanna say some things are mental and some things are material, and I think by mental, we mean they're not real. And I think by material, we mean they're real. But here's an example of, okay, they're both real, they're both happening, so what do we do with that, you know?
It's true. And I think, the work that I do involves only one side of that, which is the physicality and the national security. And
I
the
love.
officials don't necessarily want to know about the weirdness part of it, even though
But it's creeping in on it's still there.
and I think some of them know more than we might think
Yeah,
as well. But it's just an interesting dichotomy in a way.
yeah.